All right, so we're going to kick it off here now. Alex, I'll ask you if you can assist anybody who's having trouble. If you do find anybody that's having any challenges here that are stuck in the waiting room, I'm going to reach out to them once we kick things off and direct them to Alex if they have any trouble getting into the main session here. Thank you for registering, everybody. I think that's where some folks are getting stuck. You have to go through a registration process to get on, and I think a few of them may not have done that in advance. So we'll welcome them when they come on. But today is one of the highlights of what we do each month, and that's our advisor roundtable. It's a great peer-to-peer opportunity for us to share best thinking, best practices, and just really pick each other's brains on what's working in your practice, how you built a practice, how you can teach others to kind of follow in your footsteps a little bit. So that being said, I'm going to give you the ground rules first, then I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. And the thing that I encourage everyone to do is ask a whole bunch of questions because it's really all about what you want to get out of this meeting. Rob and I prepared a little bit on what we want to talk about, but I would encourage everyone here to ask those questions and find out how it can be impactful to your practice and how you can help your clients, help your prospects, etc. So the ground rules for today. So this meeting is for financial professionals only. We ask you that if you're asking questions or consuming material to obviously consult with your compliance group. If there's anything that we talk about today and you have a question on whether or not it's applicable to you and your firm, ask your manager, ask your compliance officer. Make sure that you're understanding the sort of rules and regulations of your business, of your state, of any governing bodies that do govern your practice. So we always want to be compliant on that side. We're recording today's session, so what I'll ask is please keep yourself on mute. If you do have a question, we do encourage you to use the chat function, or as always, you can send me an email. I get about half and half. You can send it to chealy@theadvisornetwork.org. Happy to take questions that way if you don't want to publicly post them in the chat. So we can facilitate questions that way, or certainly put them in the chat, and we'll try to address all of those questions that we can. So again, welcome. And today, again, as I mentioned before, this is a meeting for all of you. Even though Rob's going to be the one sharing his insight, it's really about your practice and how you might apply what you heard today from what Rob has to say to what you do. So we're going to talk about business owner clients today. And I'd love to introduce Rob Warren. Rob's someone I've gotten to know for a very long time now. Catching up's always wonderful. Rob, I'll let you tell a little bit about your background here, but we were catching up a minute ago. I happened to be passing through Alabama the other day, and I had to start that. I promise if I came through with more than an hour through the state of Alabama, I would have stopped and saw you and would have had a coffee together. So I'm glad to have you on, and maybe take a few moments if you wouldn't mind and introduce yourself.
Yeah, and first, for those that are not familiar, maybe have not traveled through the South, what Colin opted to do was spend his time at the Buc-ee's truck and gas stop there. So for anybody that's been and stopped at Buc-ee's before, you understand that Colin made the right decision with that one. But Colin, great to see you as always. As the years have gone by, you and I have had a chance to work more closely together, and I really appreciate that opportunity and really love what we've built here and you've built here at the Advisor Network. But from a quick background, I've been a partner and an advisor here on our team. We're Twickenham Advisors, affiliated with Hightower and RIA. I actually got my start in the wirehouse through the Morgan Stanley FAA program before I had the opportunity to join our team. The opportunity to join the team was one that was an incredible opportunity for me in my career, but also to allow me to have more of a focus in working with business owners as well. The opportunities that exist working within a team, the opportunities that exist to specialize have been incredible for my career. And I had a background through graduate school and in a prior job with the SBA and the SBDC of working directly with business owners that I really enjoyed and wanted to leverage throughout this career. But we live in Huntsville, Alabama. Part of the things that I'll touch on here, I'm sure through the question and answers, will be the vertical that we tend to focus on here in Huntsville is defense and aerospace, sort of a government contracting world. Government contracting is the larger bucket. Defense and aerospace is a subset of that. It's unique in and of itself, as are many of the other verticals that exist and an advisor can operate in. But we've got a good business here in Huntsville. I'm one of four partners, have been here now for, oh my goodness, going on 12 years. It's been a great opportunity for us, and working with business owners has been one of the highlights that I have in joining the team.
That's awesome. And I've enjoyed our time working together. You say 12 years. I think all 12 or many of them the last couple, but most of them we've spent some time together and it's been wonderful. So I appreciate you being a part of this. We're going to call today's session The Tale of Two Robs. All right. And as we prepped a little bit before, here's why we're going to do that. So when Rob and I spent some time together, he talked about just getting started in working with business owners as a financial advisor. And then he's learned a lot and applied that into the way he works with business owners now. So I think a lot of people on this call might be new to that. And I see some faces that aren't. So we're going to spend some time at the beginning and we're going to spend some time a little later on with what you've learned and how you've applied it to your future self from the beginning. But let's go all the way back. So whether it be from the Wirehouse or certainly when you joined Twickenham and started really focusing on this group of business owners, let's start with why. Why did you focus on those folks? Why was that a driver of you and your business starting way back?
Yeah, and my answer to this is almost tongue in cheek, and I think it was the outlaw Jesse James that, when asked why did you rob banks, he said, "Well, that's where the money is," right? And getting started throughout this career, where did I target? I tried to target those people that I could pre-qualify on a relatively quick basis. Executives and business owners were the target-rich environment that I identified. And, again, sort of the tongue in cheek answer is, why did I target that? Because that's where I saw the best opportunities.
That's awesome. And I think everybody out there, if you think about your local marketplace, there's certainly folks that you know that are business owners, are business partners, are founders, etc. This is the group we're talking about now. So let's take us back for a moment to you started thinking about this vertical. You wanted to focus in this area. How did you start to decide who you were going to speak to? How did you prep? Sort of how did you put together what you were going to say to them, lead to them, and kind of try to get them in for a meeting?
Yeah, and I think that I need to frame and contextualize the environment when I began, because it's very different from the environment today. Again, was about 14 years ago when I began my career, but believe it or not, people still had landlines at that time, and so cold calling was going out of fashion, or at least the traditional method of cold calling, where you might work with a marketing company that would provide you a cold calling list, and obviously they give all of the appropriate guarantees that the numbers have been scrubbed against do not calls. They've been scrubbed to make sure that they're legitimate numbers and these sorts of things. I found that to not be true the majority of the time, but I did think that cold calling was and could be an effective prospecting tactic. So what I decided to do instead was spend quite a bit of time and effort in trying to build my own calling lists. So in order to do that, I joined our local chamber as an ambassador, which essentially gave me access to the membership directory, but also to events. In addition to that, I also upgraded my LinkedIn. This was in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. And in upgrading my LinkedIn option to a sales navigator profile, it gave me the ability to have much more customizable search functions. I was able to build searches, advanced searches within Salesforce that allowed me to create calling lists much easier based on the keywords that I was looking for. And those were owner, those were principal, it was president, it was vice president, it was executive. But I created and I used built advanced searches with these keywords included, so that I was only receiving in my search functions those profiles that included those keywords. And I found that was a really effective way to create a cold call list, going around the traditional method of just buying a list. In addition to that, I knew that the do not call registry was something that was important back in those days. But I also knew, based on understanding the rules around the do not call, was focused on people's homes. And what I was doing was calling and targeting these executives and business owners at their place of business rather than their home. So there was some work that went into it, and I tried to be very intentional with how I structured my day so that more of my personal time before work hours in the morning or after work hours in the evening, if I didn't have an event to go to, I was using that time to actually build and curate the calling list, and then using strategic hours within the workday to actually make the calls and then get out and what I used to call play in traffic.
I like that a lot. You mentioned two things just to recap and for everybody out there. So again, Chamber of Commerce. So pretty much every town has one. I would assume almost every town. I don't want to say every in case there's not, but just about every town has one. Take a look and think about getting involved into LinkedIn. I'm going to throw a little nugget out to people. There are asset management and partner firms that do training and advanced training on LinkedIn. If you have not gotten into this, what Rob's talking about is unbelievably helpful stuff. He might be able to help you, or somebody else on this call can help you with how we use it. But there are firms that would love to partner with you and spend a little bit of time on how to best use that tool. It is a incredibly powerful tool to market to individuals, to learn about businesses, to learn about other folks. And you might happen to know some common people. Not a bad way to get introduced if you happen to know somebody that already knows that individual and you're friends with both of them. So could be a great opportunity. So now, Rob, let's move to the next level. You got to know these individuals. You decided you were going to have a conversation. You reached out, whether it be cold calling or cold walking or the rest of it. Talk to us about what your value proposition was to them when you talked to those companies. What were you looking for? What kind of companies? And what were you talking to them about?
Early on, the conversation was relatively general. Over time, and you mentioned sort of in the notes that I made, sort of a 1.0 conversation versus a 2.0 conversation. But initially, it was very general, basic questions. And one of my favorite questions to ask business owners at the appropriate time, right? It's not the first question that comes out, but is what's the business worth? What is your business worth, right? And it's the question that you ask, and then you wait until you get an answer. The answer, the lack of answer, or a delayed response can be very revealing in terms of the business owner's perception or knowledge around their business in and of themselves. But that was a question that I found to be very effective and would lead to and create new conversations, different conversations, or new opportunities for me. Most business owners I've found either have an aspirational value in mind based on something they've heard, whether it's within peers or the industry or some other multiple that they assume applies to every business in their vertical, right? So that sort of aspirational value is one that we can certainly have a conversation around because if it feels as though a client tells me their business is worth something significantly larger and higher than I feel it's worth, then the next question is what's driving that value? Right. But that was the initial question. What's the business worth to actually get my foot in the door, create a constructive conversation? But early on, the second question that I would ask is, what would your ideal exit look like? And those two things frame the conversation really well in the business owner's mind. What is it worth today? What do I think it's worth? And then ideally, what would an exit look like, right? Let's get the brain and the business owner thinking, where do I sit today? And then what's the ideal outcome down the road for my business, for my family, and for my employees? And it positions me throughout that process in that prospect's mind. And so those were the two questions that I would usually ask to try to create a more in-depth relationship.
It's great. And the if you don't know, there are software available to do this. We're going to stay away from using any one software because I think ultimately that's up to you and how to choose. There are also partners that you can find, whether it be CPAs or other folks within town that might be able to help and do this. If they don't know the answer, there are ways to solve it. And certainly, but both Rob, myself, anyone else here on the call that is knowledgeable can help you figure that out. I will throw one other name out there just because it's a bit of a hack that we learned a while ago. Principal Financial Group. You're all well aware the insurance related company, also asset management arm, et cetera. Principal Financial Group will run this type of valuation Rob's talking about for free. So if you reach out to that group, They will run and do a full valuation. They'll assign someone to run that. They'll collect the financials. They'll run the valuation. They can give an answer to the question. What's in it for them, quite frankly? They're looking for insurance business. So when they find out that there's a gap maybe in the insurance coverage relative to the valuation of the company, well, guess what? There's an opportunity for you to position insurance. But they'll do that. And so if you have no prior knowledge of what tools to use or who to turn to, that's a great resource that every person who's a financial advisor or financial professional should have access to. So keep that in mind for a free, easy, and guided way to do this kind of thing. So Rob, don't want to belabor things, but once in a while there's a nugget in there that folks on the call should know going out there. Greg brought one question up here that I think is good before we start moving towards this 2.0. He talked about gatekeepers, and you've encountered them. I guarantee the early Rob at the end of the day, making those heroic cold calls at the end of the day, found a couple of people that were harder to get to than others. How'd you battle that?
Honestly, I laughed as soon as you brought that up because it brings back memories of trying to get around some of those gatekeepers. The way I found it to be most effective was to essentially call when the business owner or the principal is likely in their office at their desk, but their secretary or their gatekeeper is not. Right. So that's, 7 to 8 in the morning, maybe 7 to 8:30, depending on your marketplace. And then usually after 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon or evenings. The other thing that I did is I realized how a lot of these automated phone trees worked, and I figured out how to get to a dial by name directory so that I never had to encounter another active human being that could stand in the way between me and the person I was trying to reach.
The good part of AI at that point, if you can find your way in, that's great. Okay, so somebody, you have that conversation, you ask them the question, you find out that ultimately they don't know the answer, they know the answer, and you're questioning whether it's right or wrong. Where do you take the conversation after you ask them this question about value and you start to come with the idea of what do you want to do next?
Yeah, and usually we're either relatively close on evaluation. Their assumption on the value of their business could be close, or there could be a huge gap or a huge delta between what they think they're worth and what I think they're worth. If we're close in assumptions on value, or if they give me a value, allow me to run evaluation, and we come back pretty close, I give them a vote of confidence. And then I also ask, how did you know that this was roughly your value? Is it a multiple on your EBITDA? Is it a multiple on your top line revenue? Do you have something within your business that requires annual valuations? An ESOP, for example, very common in our marketplace as well. And usually what I would find is that there had been some endeavors into some sort of exit with their business in order for them to get relatively close. And if not through their business, a peer business has gone through an experience relatively closely, and they're close enough in makeup to allow an assumption on the multiple to be applied to their business. So that was a vote of confidence for them that they knew what they were talking about, and we could have a much more pointed and specific conversation around the exit. If they were wildly off in valuation from my perspective, then usually I would begin to ask what they thought was driving value in their business. One of the things that I always was hesitant around, and still am to this day, is insulting a business owner if they tell me their business is worth X and I think they're worth 50% of X. I would very rarely try to insult them and say, nope, I think you're worth half of what you think you're worth. Instead, I would try to ask questions. And either I learned something new about the business that I had not considered, or the process of asking and answering questions, they understand pretty quickly that their assumptions may not be wholly and completely accurate. And it allows them to come to the realization themselves without me having to insult them and point it out that they're not worth the same thing that the competitor across the street is worth for these reasons.
Yeah. Like the Zillow effect, right? So what your house is worth is, considered to be one thing, but once you put that thing on the market, you could have a bidding war, or you could have one sole bidder that comes in under market and depends. It's only worth what people offer, at the end of the day. So I think you're spot on with that. So let's talk about the first time as you're talking about exits now, and we're going to do that, and we're going to work our way to 2.0 because you've obviously now had more more history with doing this. But let's catch the middle for a second. You talked about, getting ready for or preparing for the idea of an event. And again, I think everybody on the call, be careful of the word sale, right? It elicits something for folks that means I'm basically selling to somebody else, and what am I going to do? It evokes a lot of emotion. So an event, a transaction, some sort of a liquidity oriented type of situation. But employees can be involved. You mentioned an ESOP. Employees are one option for this. Certainly there's a competitor or some sort of strategic situation that might be a good fit, especially if there's a already relationship. And then ultimately there is a transition of control to somebody else from inside or outside the area. So, have you ever, this was off, not necessarily on our call the other day. Have you ever talked to folks about, do they have a written succession plan? Do they have a sort of a written plan on what they plan on doing in the future? And you find that people do or don't have that? Is it different than maybe how often people have valuation already done?
That is certainly a question that I've asked as I've gotten deeper into relationships with business owner clients, and I've found that probably less than 10% have an actual written succession plan that they're able either to refer to or bring out and show me. Yeah, less than 10%.
So good opportunity in general. Again, that same question, not having one is okay. Absence of that doesn't make that a good situation, right? In general. So, for everybody on the call, think about those opportunities. If they say they don't have a valuation, if they say they don't have a written succession plan, those might be opportunities to engage in a conversation. Again, you're not selling anything. You're talking about the future of their business. So let's talk about that person the first couple of times in Rob 1.0 that says, hey, okay, you're thinking about a transaction. How can I be of help? How did you step in, and what kind of actions and things did you do to help that business owner?
So I think it's important for the business owner to understand the types of transactions that occur. And so a conversation around the types of transactions, you alluded to them earlier, Colin. I think that's very important for the business owner to understand. Every business owner, for the most part, wants to operate their business at maximum enterprise value on a Friday, sell the business over a weekend, and then move off into their next phase of life, their next chapter of life by Monday. Most buyers are not interested in that. If a buyer is interested in something like that, it's likely at a significant discount to what the enterprise value could be, right? A buyer wants to de-risk as much as possible, and maintaining continuity of business operations, customer relationships, those sorts of things are incredibly helpful in de-risking for the buyer, right? So a business owner often might have to have a trade-off. How long do I want to continue operating and working in this business when I might not be the majority owner, right? Versus how quickly do I want to exit so I can move on to the next chapter of life? And you also get into potential deals that might be required to go to a strategic buyer, where that opportunity might be relatively present. But you also might get into a transaction with business or with some of the employees or management where there's an option to maintain continuity, but it does require some risk on the part of a seller, potentially through a seller finance note or an owner finance note. So making sure that the business owners understand that there are different exits that will require more or less involvement on the part of the business owner, taking on more or less risk on the part of the business owner, or leaving value on the table if their ultimate goal is to have a very quick transaction and then move on with their life and the other things that they want to do with their life.
So the that's a great answer, and the question here is interesting because it's kind of something that we didn't gloss over, but I think it's something we should address. The question that came in was, what is the minimum to do this? And I'm going to answer this generically, and then I'm going to let you in Huntsville because we've talked about the difference in marketplace kind of work. So to answer this, first of all, business owners of all sizes need help. So I wouldn't just immediately turn around and say this only works if you're talking to people with $1 million of earnings or $1 million of revenue or $10 million of earnings. It's really something you should explore what that business owner is trying to do. Rob really said that well earlier. It's all about these conversations along the path here. But there are certain areas where you can be extremely helpful to this business owner. often there is a sweet spot where you can participate and be a very good advocate for this company, where there's not yet coverage from, let's call it an investment bank or a private equity fund. They're not in their ear yet. They're a little smaller than maybe that group. That might be a couple $1 million of earnings or net income. At that point, they're going to get a lot of phone calls. They're going to have a lot of people saying, hey, let me represent you. Let me get you involved. Let me start a transaction for you, where you can kind of maybe grow them into that space if you talk to them a little earlier. So I would be hesitant to say there's a minimum you want to talk to here, but the choices of what you can do are a little more limited on the smaller side, where we're going to open up a lot more choices when you get to a million or a couple $1 million of EBITDA or net income.
That has been exactly my experience, and I have had to be somewhat the bearer of bad news for a handful of clients that were expecting to be able to sell their business for a multiple on their free cash flows. And ultimately, what I had to help them understand was that there was just not a buyer out there that was willing to pay for something like that. But instead, their sale, their exit was going to be based more on the book value of their hard assets.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's a good question overall. And I didn't, we're not dodging the question. There isn't a direct, but I does what you can do. It does tend to be something that kind of aligns with the size of the firm, the revenue of the firm, and maybe again the size of the opportunity. So, reach out if you want any more clarity on that particular question. So let's go to that first, not maybe not the first transaction, but one of your first transactions, right? So the 1.0 version of this, you're taking a company and you're walking them into a event, right? And that's a meaningful psychological and obviously financial transaction for that business owner. Tell us a little bit about how you kind of worked with that business owner and what you learned from it.
So ultimately, that the first one that we went through, or I went through, was one where we had had some forays into conversations with investment banks before. So something that was relatively common among defense contracting businesses in our marketplace were top hat plans on their 401ks, right? So we had cash balance plans that were involved. We had some profit sharing plans that were included in the 401ks. Those things can be incredibly helpful in operating a business, right? Recruiting the right talent, retaining the right talent, making sure that the right or the key employees are rewarded for their efforts and their contributions to the business. Most buyers are not interested in carrying on those sorts of employee benefits that aren't completely necessary. So one of the first ones that we worked on, we actually helped the client understand that the cash balance plan has been incredibly helpful for the business owner, some key employees, some highly compensated employees. And if you're familiar with cash balance plans, the right mix is trying to have older, highly compensated executives and principals, and then lower compensated younger staff. That creates the right mix. But it's not an ongoing obligation that a buyer really wants. So part of our prep, which was over the course of about 3 years, but part of our prep was winding down the cash balance plan and creating a 401k that was competitive in the marketplace so that they could continue to retain and recruit good employees, but wouldn't be a ball and chain or wouldn't be a disadvantage for a potential buyer down the road. So fortunately, some experience working within retirement plans in this space was very helpful so that I could go back to this client and say, look, what you've done has been incredibly generous, and that's why you've got such long-standing employees, long-tenured employees. However, we need to figure out a way to compensate them more effectively so that your business is more attractive to potential buyers that are out there that are not interested in inheriting these expensive employee benefits.
Yeah, and it's going to be a good transition point into between call it Rob 1.0 into Rob 2.0, because the things you learn along the way and some of these, the nuggets that you can share, that's a great way to kind of prep a business owner to what kinds of activities and things can you do to best position your company for the future. So as we make that transition and pivot here a little bit, I thought that was a really great point. I'll pause and say, make sure everybody, if you don't understand what he's talking about with the cash balance plan and other retirement planning opportunities there, learn about it because there are some unique things for your own business that you can really help yourself. So educate yourself there on the good, and you also have learned a little bit on some challenges in using those for the future. So let's talk about that for a little bit. 2.0, you've done some transactions, you've cut your teeth, you've learned a lot, you're talking to more and more business owners. 2.0 for you, you mentioned to me, you're really in a referral mode now, right? Referral business is by the primary.
It is, and fortunately, to the point in my career now that my active, ongoing cold prospecting has kind of fallen off, and excuse me, I'm able to pursue warm leads, warm introductions. It certainly makes the hunt a whole lot easier. I wouldn't say it's more fun, but certainly the success rate has gone up. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And you get that by reputation, by doing some great deals, by having great relationships. So let's talk about what you brought up a good point, but a company that says, okay, I'm ready to go. And you look at some of these companies and you say, no, you're not. You're not ready to go yet. There's some work to be done. Talk to us a little bit about, what's a healthy looking, let's call it transition into somebody that may want to move towards a event of some sort versus somebody that you've seen that may need a little bit more work. Maybe give some examples.
Yeah, and I've got two in mind, and they juxtapose each other really well. On one side, it was a business owner that had already gone through an exit, had prior experience going through that exit in this vertical, incredibly knowledgeable when it came to his business and how to operate his business. But because of the market environment throughout the first exit, and because the business type was very different. It was more of a services businesses versus a product technology development business. The multiples were wildly out of whack. So one client that assumed he knew very confidently what his business was worth, when we began not doing valuations on our own, this particular client we didn't run valuations on because of the nature of the business. We began holding calls with investment banks relatively quickly. And it turned out because his business was so different from the first one that he had a transaction with, the multiple was significantly higher. The first transaction was in the middle of the financial crisis. The second transaction was about 6 years ago. And so the market environment was different. The amount of money chasing some of these deals was incredibly different. Interest rates were very different. But his business ended up being worth significantly more than he thought. He was an incredibly curious business owner. So he began asking the questions, why is this business worth more than the one that I sold 12 years ago? And ultimately, it came down to multiples having shifted and his business being more of a technology development business in the defense space versus a services business, which was much more commoditized. So just being a fly on the wall for those conversations helped me understand that, yes, these two businesses may have filed a tax return with the same industry code, but the multiple in the two businesses was very different because of what they did and the customers they served.
This is an interesting question here because it's something, again, I think if you have not done this business before, you're going to have some questions in this area. I'm going to give a preface before I even say it that you need to ask your compliance group or your manager, your firm. Every firm will be a little different with the answer to this question. The question is, how did you decide what bank was the right fit for a transaction like this? And I will say this much, each firm is going to have different rules and regulations, whether you can or can't work with a bank. You may just be referring a client to a bank in general. It could be anything like that. I would suggest before Rob answers the question on what his experience is, first of all, talk to your manager, talk to your compliance, talk to the folks within your firm. But there's also local resources, whether it be attorneys or CPAs or other folks that can make suggestions and referrals and other folks that can get involved. You may or may not have investment banks in your town, in your city. If you don't, and you're looking for those referrals, well, certainly there are folks like Rob and myself that can help you find a applicable person for this. But generally speaking, your group of individuals that you surround yourself with might have some good suggestions. But Rob, how did you source, kind of who the right fit would be when you look at a transaction?
In my opinion, personality fit, cultural fit are the most important things to match between any advisor, investment bank, M&A attorney, whatever that other professional is, and the business owner client. If the personality fit isn't there, if there's not a cultural fit among everybody, the process, which can be long and painstaking, becomes that much more tedious and that much more painful for the client. Business owners are not they're not very experienced in opening their kimono completely and divulging all of their information. If they don't have a good personality fit with the people that they are working with, which it can be 12 months or longer, it's the deal's not going to go through.
Yeah.
There are too many things that can occur at the last minute that if there's already the underlying tension on a personality standpoint, these last minute changes, these last minute tweaks, they're just grating on the individual. And I've actually seen business owners walk away from very lucrative deals because they're just tired of the personalities that they're working with.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first filter that needs to go through. Is there a fit that can allow for a long-term, tedious relationship of back and forth where a business owner does have to divulge more than they've probably been comfortable divulging, throughout the past of operating the business. Once you get beyond that, and obviously we're human beings, we can be very adaptable. But once you get beyond that personality fit, what I usually looked for was depth and experience in the vertical. If it's a fund that's trying, or if it's a bank that's trying to launch a new fund, that they've not played in before, that's probably not the one that I would lead with and start with, right? I want to use investment banks, or I want to use resources that have experience in working within a specific vertical, that they may have seen and experienced things that I've never seen and experienced, that the client has never seen and experienced, that can be very helpful throughout the process in trying to maximize that enterprise value. So personality, cultural fit, because again, they're going to be working closely together for a long period of time, and then depth and expertise in that specific vertical.
I'd also add it's important to know and have that conversation with the business owner on what they're trying to achieve. The simple thing for all of us is you should get as much money as you possibly can, right? And that could end up being, a sale to some third party in terms of maximize the enterprise value of the firm. But that business owner may have different loyalties, right? Whether it's employees, they want to make sure their employees are well taken care of, that a building that they've owned forever is still utilized, that some sort of a name is carried on versus changing everything to the buyers. You could end up with a transaction that's not the single largest liquidity event that's possible because that's what that particular individual wants, and those values need to be maintained through the transaction. So you can't, once you sell the company, you can't make everything still happen, but you do. Rob was really well to say that you have to find that personality fit, and even if it's between trying to connect, a potential buyer or other party, you have to find the right fit. And it's really sometimes a great question to ask that business owner. Are you comfortable with where this may go? You may get extra money from it, but they don't have to keep anything about the way your company was before, including those employees. So that could be a very important thing to have and get out in the open as early as possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Colin, 100%. Understanding ultimately what's the ideal outcome for the client, but then also what are acceptable outcomes, right? It's rare, and in fact, I've never had a client go through a transaction where we had the exact ideal outcome that they wanted, but understanding the boundaries on what's acceptable as well helps you understand where we can push and pull on some of these levers to actually get a deal done that the client will be happy with. The buyer's remorse can be very damaging to a financial advisor's long-term relationship. If you've been the one to lead a client through this transaction, they're not happy with the outcome, they have buyer's remorse, their trust in you to give them advice to their family going forward might be impeded in some way. So having a client with buyer's remorse after a transaction is never good for a long-term relationship.
No, and so that everybody knows whether you're participating in the revenue or not, we all know that there's a wonderful golden goose at the end, which is liquidity that ultimately gets managed for one or more generations. That's a wonderful thing to take care of if you can when you help those folks through the liquidity event. To Rob's point, having everything as wrapped up and as positive as possible really helps you with your probability of managing that wealth afterwards. So without a doubt. Question that came in for this is interesting on this. We touched on this before, but where and when do you incorporate? They said planning, so I'm going to break it into a couple sections. There's estate planning and then there's financial planning. I'm not sure which one they're referring to, but let's call it planning in general. Where do you insert that into the conversation?
Day one.
Okay.
Absolutely day one. And that's the purpose with those initial questions. What's it worth, right? I need to put a value on your personal balance sheet, right? I need to understand what your personal, your family balance sheet looks like. And in order to do that, we need to have a value on the asset that is your likely the largest single asset on the personal balance sheet. So what's it worth? Need to have a good snapshot in time of where that individual sits at that point in time. And then again, that early question, what does an ideal exit look like? So that is from a planning lens as well. And an ideal exit could be that Mr. and Mrs. Business owner that's operated for 40 years, they're not interested in significant wealth in their own name. Maybe they are interested in benefiting key employees that have helped them grow this value, or maybe they are interested in making sure that whatever liquidity event, much of it occurs outside of their estate that benefits generations beyond them. So that is helpful as well. And of course, that gets into the estate planning conversation, making sure that assets are owned correctly and the opportunities that come from a relationship standpoint of going through an estate planning process, I think is incredibly valuable as well. But I think also, Colin, this is important for me to say, I'm a CFP. And so my perspective on that might be me different because I come from more of a background of planning.
No, 100%. And I think you said that extremely well. I'll add a quick nugget for people that aren't used to this part of the conversation. When you talk about generations to come, one thing I'll add to what Rob said, it might not be generations of people. It could end up being organizations. So what do they care about? What are they passionate about? Often, of course, if there's family members and other people that they choose to potentially be important in their planning process, but you never want to leave out the opportunity to ask them about any organizations that they care about, right? That could be a major part of their life. And if you don't ask the question, you might be missing out on an opportunity to delve a little bit more deeply, especially in the estate planning process.
Yeah, and I would say, and this is a little bit of an aside, but in my experience, Colin, if there is a client that is charitably inclined, if you can get that client talking about the value system that creates that desire to be charitably inclined, you're creating a very, very close relationship with that client, which of course is valuable for us over the long term.
Absolutely. And I love that question in general, and I love your answer from day one, moment one. I'm going to add, we could keep doing these little snippets for people, but so that they know, there's a very important timeline that occurs here, and this is a specific piece to this. If you are going to start doing planning for clients, and that client decides they're interested in pursuing the idea of an event, you have a finite amount of time you can do planning before you start to shift into a lack of ability to do planning, which is once you actually engage in the idea of selling this company and enter into that process, you can no longer do a lot of the things we're talking about. You can't move structures of how things are done. You can't do some of the opportunities for tax savings. We're going to keep this very compliant and leave very generic, but there's a lot more you can do before you enter into an agreement to sell your company. Once you do, you'll lose a lot of other stuff. Did I say that generically enough?
Yeah, I think so, and I
Yeah.
would say that extends all the way to an LOI as well, right?
Yeah.
Not just the deal itself, but the LOI can be somewhat of an impediment to making changes to structures and entities and things like that.
So a great accountant involved in the situation and an attorney involved in the situation from day one would be very helpful to have as a partner group to go on and inform and help your business owner.
And I also think, Colin, personality fits among those other professionals too, right? Not just the
Yeah.
investment banking people who will be, if an investment bank is involved, they'll be intimately involved. But any other professional that you introduce, I think you might need to keep an eye toward personality fits on those as well.
And we're at the tail end of probably the time we normally want to go, but the questions have been great, and there's a couple of important things. I'm going to ask you this question from this one. You said specifically an M&A attorney, and I'm sure you've been through this before because I know I have. A lot of folks will say, "Well, I have an accountant, right? And I have an attorney, so I have all of this." But you said an M&A attorney, and some people might not understand the specificity we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think the specialization among professionals begins to become more and more important as the deal size gets larger and the deal terms get potentially more complicated, right? So an M&A attorney has a unique specialization going through transactions for businesses, right? So again, a tongue-in-cheek answer, you're not going to go to your podiatrist because you've got a problem in your gut, right? Well, they're both doctors, right? But your podiatrist is not going to be very helpful with a gut issue, right? So
Yeah.
you do want to go to a specialist and make sure they've got the experience that's important for your client to have the best outcome.
Perfect. I just want to stress to everybody out here, if you've got a last question for Rob, feel free to ask it. Again, we're heading towards the end here. I want to talk about that sort of the impact that you've had on those business owner lives. Let's keep it sort of philosophical for a moment before we get into the end of that, which again is the wealth management arm. But just generally speaking, you've worked with these folks. There's a behavioral financial and a behavioral psychology point. They've sold their company. How do you work with that individual afterwards on just kind of understanding what that means? And that first day, they don't show up at the office if they haven't been retained to stay on.
I would say that it's an important conversation to have with your business owner client around their time. What do they plan to do with their time when they've, for decades, have spent 50 plus, 60 plus hours a week on their baby, which is the business? And then suddenly, potentially, right, overnight or over a weekend, they suddenly have all this free time and the baby's not theirs anymore. What I've found is that conversation is important to broach so that the client can begin thinking about it. In my experience, for the majority of them, 6 months after their transaction and they are completely finished, they're no longer involved in any capacity. They are beginning hobbies they never thought they'd have. They are restarting hobbies that they haven't done in a while. They're actually taking travel. They're taking children, adult children, on vacations and trips that they haven't done in a while. So one of the more recent transactions that we've done was a franchise owner for a franchise food business. 60 plus hours a week, had four children, three of them are adults out of the house, one is still in the house. And going through the planning side for the transaction, I had to tell him pretty matter of factly, I will not be able to create the same cash flow from a post-sale net proceeds standpoint that you are used to earning on your business. This is what we can likely create for you over a long period of time. Is this enough? And fortunately, the client said, I would accept significantly less to not have to come back in here and work another day inside this business. And I said, well, good. As long as you're good with this, then, I'm fine moving forward. But I can't have you assuming that your free cash flow is going to be the same post-transaction than it was when you were actually working 60, 70 hours a week.
A free lunch. That'd be nice, right? At the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, so let's end with a question. This one, I think you've taken us from step prospect, prospecting step in the early 1.0, and now we're talking about psychological events after the transaction. And there's a lot of pieces in the middle. We covered some, we skipped over a bunch. There's a lot of stuff. And but there is, as a financial advisor, the one thing we haven't talked about yet is wealth management. And we did talk about planning, which is important to decide. I think this is one of the things that makes this the most interesting is as a financial advisor, 9 times out of 10, when we talk to clients, we end up talking about investments or the market or, generally asset allocation or all these other terms that ultimately are important but different. In a lot of these cases, you're not talking about any of that. And that kind of is refreshing to the business owner at the end of the day, right? The question that came in was more the inverse. They said, well, have you ever run one of these transactions where you didn't run the wealth, right? So I like don't like to look at it that way. I kind of more say, how have you transitioned from this liquidity coming into, and now all of a sudden they stop taking a paycheck, they stop getting that regular cash flow, and here comes bam that inflow at one time. How is that process for you? You can answer the other question if you want to too.
We've not actually had a client go through a transaction where we didn't manage liquidity and the wealth on the back end, and I would say the main reason for that is that our core business is wealth management. The transactions we do and help business owners go through, that's helpful. It can help create spikes in our revenue in the years in which those occur, but that's not the core part of our business. So our end goal is always to manage the wealth on the back end. With that being said, I think that we've also had businesses that we've gone through the process that have still never transacted. Still to this day, business owner is still operating. And I was going to mention this earlier when I talked about sort of the 1.0 conversation and the reason that understanding the value is important. We have been able to work with clients that have been able to take advantage of low value years. And I wish I could say that I was the genius that saw this opportunity and brought it to the client. The client was the one that actually saw it because he knew the business had taken a short-term hit to their revenues, and he wanted to take advantage of that by getting shares placed into trust at lower values so that when the business turned around, the growth occurred in these trusts outside of his estate for children and grandchildren. Thought that was an incredibly wise thing for him to take advantage of. It was a down year. He didn't want it to be a down year, but how do you make how do you make lemonade out of lemons? Let's take advantage of this while the value is down. Let's get that certified value done so that we can put the stamp on that. We can get these trusts funded. Now let's get back at hustling and growing this business, and let's have that growth occur, the majority of it outside of the estate. So I thought that was something that was incredibly insightful and wise for him to do because he knew that his business was taking a short-term hit.
Yeah.
And it would create the opportunity that if he didn't take advantage of it, would not be there in the future.
So there's a lot of questions that it seems like everyone waited the last 5 minutes to get some of their questions in. Here's what I'm going to suggest. Most of these were answered. There's one that's out there that I think is helpful for this. It's education. How do you get educated on this? How do you learn a little bit more? There are designations that you can do. There's two or three major designations. I know the CEPA, the SEPA is one that's available at a lot of firms. Again, ask your firm, ask your compliance, find out what you can get, see what's relevant, what's allowed, depending on your firm type and how you operate. But those are areas to go. There's a lot of free resources. I'd suggest just taking a look at exit planning, and I think you can find a lot of things in there. I think, would you agree with me, Rob?
I would agree 100%. There's great books out there. Designations are very helpful. You can learn a lot through those as well. But the other thing that I would do, Colin, is I would attend conferences. So there was one called ACG, and it essentially I have attended these in the past. I'm the only wealth manager that's there. It's mostly investment bankers. It's mostly commercial bankers, M&A attorneys, CPAs, but rarely do I run into another wealth manager that's there. I've learned a ton from some of the breakout sessions at these conferences.
Yeah.
And then there's also, I'll go to trade shows and conferences for the vertical that my clients operate in as well. And I'm creating conversations, I'm asking questions, and I'm just trying to learn from some of the people that are there that have the experience. But yeah, I've attended quite a few conferences and seminars and things outside of our core business in order to grow and my knowledge base and my experience.
Yeah, and that education might help. The other questions around transactions and banking, investment banks, private equity, those ones that have all come in, those are all specific things. I'm happy to answer if we can't, or I'll also make sure that Rob can be introduced on anything in his experiences that we've come through. But we're at the end of our hour. That went quickly. Couple of things I just want to note for everybody. In the next week or so, you're going to start to see dates that are rolling out for regional meetings that have to do with the advisor network in terms of some smaller sessions. We'll have one in the Northeast, one in the Southeast, and one in the West Coast. We are also going to have, I think, a number of you that are on the call or others have been in Las Vegas last year. We're expecting to have, again, in November, our the Advisor Network Connect 2026 meeting, which will be wonderful, as well as a virtual version of that as well. So we're going to do a bigger virtual meeting over the summer. It's tough to get folks when they're, potentially at the beach house, maybe, or on vacation with the family to go to a conference. A lot easier if you want to attend a session or two, pop on your phone or on your laptop and learn a little bit more on other things. So you'll hear a little bit more about that. But those in-person opportunities are meant to augment what we do on a monthly basis. Rob, this was awesome. I always love catching up with you and spending time with you. Anybody who's out there that is interested in volunteering to be a part of a future session, we encourage it. We would love to hear different opinions, different topics. And please give us a call, send us an email, tell us what you'd like to talk about. We'll spend a few minutes on the phone and hopefully get you slotted in for something in the future. Rob, thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Colin. And feel free, share my information. If anybody has any questions, email me and reach out. Happy to have a conversation or answer some one-offs.
You got it. That sounds great. All right, everybody, have a wonderful day. Appreciate all of you, and we'll talk to you all very soon. Be well.